The evening air carried the scent of expensive perfume and aged wine. Veronica Sterling stepped through the etched glass doors of Restaurant Celestine. The establishment gleamed with understated opulence, crystal fixtures refracting light into rainbow patterns across cream-colored walls. Veronica moved through the space like she owned it, which in a sense she did. Her technology empire had investments in half the buildings on this street. Her son Oliver trailed behind, small fingers wrapped tightly around the fabric of her charcoal Armani skirt. At 5 years old, he had already learned to navigate his mother's world with careful silence. His wide hazel eyes took in everything, processing the gleaming surfaces and hushed conversations with the same analytical precision his mother applied to quarterly reports. Veronica had scheduled this dinner with meticulous care. 30 minutes for a meal with Oliver, followed by a discreet meeting with 3 board members in the private dining room upstairs. The reservation at table 12, the VIP section, had been confirmed twice. Everything operated according to plan, as it always did in her precisely constructed life. The hostess, a young woman in an elegant black dress, greeted them with practiced warmth. Veronica barely acknowledged her, already mentally reviewing the talking points for her upcoming meeting. She had built Sterling Technologies from a garage startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire through focus and discipline. Sentimentality was a luxury she could not afford. The hostess led them through the main dining area, past tables occupied by the city's elite. Veronica recognized several faces, offered curt nods to those who mattered, ignored those who did not. Oliver stayed close, his presence barely registering in her awareness beyond the occasional tug on her skirt when he struggled to keep pace. They were halfway to the VIP section when Oliver stopped walking entirely. Veronica felt the sudden resistance and turned, irritation flickering across her carefully composed features. Her son stood frozen, staring at something across the dining room with an intensity she had never seen in him before. Following his gaze, Veronica spotted an unremarkable corner table near the kitchen entrance. A man in a faded blue work shirt sat across from a little girl with copper coals bouncing in pigtails. The girl was laughing, her whole face lit with delight as the man carefully cut her pasta into bite-sized pieces. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, and when he looked at his daughter, his expression held something Veronica could not immediately identify. Contentment, she realized. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. The man looked perhaps 37, with sun-weathered skin and calluses visible even from this distance. His shirt had been washed so many times the collar was fraying. The little girl wore a simple cotton dress with a small stain near the hem, probably from an earlier adventure. They did not belong in Restaurant Celestine. The cheapest entree here cost more than that man likely earned in a day. Oliver whispered something Veronica almost missed. She leaned down. "What did you say?" "I want to sit there, Mama." His voice carried a desperate urgency she had never heard from her typically docile child. "With them, please." Veronica straightened, confusion warring with annoyance. "Oliver, we have a table reserved. The best table. You will have your meal. And then Mama has important work to discuss with some people." "I don't want the best table." Oliver's fingers tightened on her skirt. "I want to sit with the girl who's smiling. She looks happy. I want to be happy too." The word struck Veronica like a physical blow. Her son, surrounded by every advantage money could provide, was begging to sit at a shabby corner table because a little girl there knew how to smile. The realization settled in her chest with uncomfortable weight. The hostess hovered nearby, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Veronica could feel other diners beginning to notice the delay. She built her empire on decisive action, on never showing weakness or hesitation. Standing in the middle of Restaurant Celestine, frozen by her 5-year-old simple request, represented exactly the kind of vulnerability she had spent years eliminating from her life. But Oliver was looking up at her with those wide hazel eyes, pleading silently. When had she last seen him genuinely want something? Most days he accepted whatever she provided with quiet resignation. This spark of desire, of specific longing, was so rare she found herself unable to dismiss it. "Fine," Veronica heard herself say. The hostess blinked in surprise. Veronica gestured toward the corner table. "We will sit there. But madam, your reservation is in the VIP section. That table is not suitable for someone of your status. The family there may not be appropriate company." Veronica's eyes went cold, the expression that made junior executives tremble. "My son decides what is appropriate for our evening. Adjust the reservation accordingly." The hostess flushed and hurried away. Veronica took Oliver's hand and walked across the dining room, acutely aware of the attention they were attracting. Whispers followed in their wake. The sterling CEO was abandoning the VIP section to sit with what appeared to be a construction worker and his child. By morning, this would be analyzed in a dozen gossip columns. As they approached, the man looked up from his daughter's plate. His expression shifted from contentment to surprise to something approaching panic. He clearly recognized Veronica. Most people in the city did. Her face appeared regularly in business publications, usually accompanied by words like ruthless, brilliant, and uncompromising. Veronica stopped at the edge of their small table. The man had green eyes, she noticed. They held intelligence and wariness in equal measure. His hands, still holding the knife and fork, bore scars that spoke of manual labor. Everything about him screamed working class, yet he sat with his daughter in this expensive restaurant like they had every right to be here. "My son wishes to join your table," Veronica said, her tone more statement than request. "May we sit?" The little girl with copper curls looked delighted, bouncing slightly in her seat. "Yes, you can sit right here, miss. I'm Ruby, and I'm 6 years old. And this is my daddy, and we're celebrating because I got all stars on my spelling test." Her enthusiasm was infectious. Even Veronica felt the corners of her mouth twitch, an almost smile that felt foreign on her face. The man, Ruby's father, recovered from his shock quickly. He stood, nearly knocking over his water glass in his haste, and pulled out a chair. "Please, of course. I'm Thomas Reed." His voice was deeper than she expected, with a slight roughness that suggested years of shouting over construction noise. "This is unexpected, but Ruby would love the company." Oliver slid into the chair next to Ruby before Veronica could reconsider. The two children looked at each other with the open curiosity only young kids possessed. Ruby started chattering immediately about her spelling test, her favorite cartoon, her daddy's special pancakes. Veronica sat across from Thomas, suddenly aware of how absurd this situation appeared. She ran a technology empire worth billions. He wore a shirt that had seen better days. Yet here, they sat at a cramped corner table near the kitchen, their children already forming the kind of instant bond she had long forgotten was possible. Thomas settled back into his chair, clearly uncomfortable but trying to hide it. "I apologize if we're intruding on your evening. Ruby really wanted to eat somewhere nice tonight, and I found a cafe next door that we could afford. The hostess made a mistake seating us here, but Ruby loved the lights so much I didn't have the heart to correct it. So they were not supposed to be in Restaurant Celestin at all. They were refugees from a cheaper establishment, accidentally placed among the elite." Veronica should have felt vindicated in her earlier assessment. Instead, she felt a strange respect for this man who let his daughter enjoy fancy lights even when it cost him dignity. The mistake was fortunate, Veronica found herself saying. "My son rarely expresses preferences. You must be doing something right if Oliver wants to stay." Thomas looked at Oliver, who was listening raptly to Ruby's animated description of her pet goldfish. "Kids know what matters. They haven't learned yet to care about the wrong things." The observation hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Veronica was not ready to examine. A waiter appeared, young and perfectly groomed, his expression souring slightly as he took in Thomas's worn clothing. "Have you decided on your order, sir?" The emphasis on the last word carried subtle contempt. Thomas opened the menu, and Veronica watched his eyes widen slightly at the prices. He closed it quickly. "Just the house pasta, please, and water." "The house pasta is $45, sir. Perhaps the cafe next door would be more suitable for your budget." The insult was barely veiled. Thomas's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Ruby spoke up with fierce 6-year-old indignation. My daddy has money. He works super hard. He builds things. He's the best daddy in the whole world. Oliver, surprising everyone, added his voice. Mr. Thomas seems very nice. Nicer than most of Mama's friends. Veronica felt something crack inside her carefully maintained composure. Her son had just publicly declared that this stranger possessed more warmth than the people she surrounded herself with. The accuracy of that assessment was devastating. She turned to the waiter, her voice dropping to the temperature that preceded corporate executions. Bring 2 orders of the house pasta, 1 for Mr. Reed, 1 for his daughter. Bill everything to my corporate account, and if I hear you speak to any guest in this establishment with such disrespect again, I will ensure the owner knows exactly why I'm pulling my investment from this restaurant group. The waiter went pale and fled. Thomas looked at Veronica with an expression mixing gratitude and discomfort. You didn't need to do that. I can pay for our meal. I know, Veronica replied, but your daughter defended you with more loyalty in 30 seconds than I've seen from my executive team in years. That deserves pasta. Thomas smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and changed his entire face. Veronica felt her breath catch slightly. When had she last been genuinely surprised by another person? When had someone last looked at her like she was human other than a walking balance sheet? Ruby reached across the table and grabbed Oliver's hand. You're my friend now. Want to hear about my goldfish? His name is Captain Bubbles, and he does tricks. Oliver nodded, a small smile appearing on his usually serious face. Veronica watched her son transform, saw animation replace the careful blankness he typically wore. This little girl with her second-hand dress and boundless enthusiasm was giving Oliver something Veronica's money never could. Permission to simply be a child. Thomas was watching Ruby too, his expression soft with uncomplicated love. Veronica found herself studying his hands again as they rested on the table. Strong hands, scarred from work, but gentle when they touched his daughter's hair to smooth down a flyaway curl. What do you do, Mr. Reed? Veronica asked, genuinely curious now. I work construction currently, building renovation, mostly commercial spaces, but I trained as an architect. Life took some turns. There was a story behind that carefully neutral statement. Veronica recognized evasion when she heard it. She practiced it herself constantly. And Ruby's mother. Thomas's expression clouded. She passed away 3 years ago. Workplace accident. Ruby was very young, barely remembers her. I'm sorry, Veronica said, and meant it. She understood loss, though hers had been different. She had lost her mother to illness when she was 17, thrown herself into building her company as a way to outrun grief. Thank you, we manage. Ruby's the best thing that ever happened to me. Makes every difficult day worthwhile. The simple declaration carried such conviction that Veronica felt an unfamiliar ache in her chest. When had she last said anything similar about Oliver? When had she last made him feel like he was the center of her world, rather than an obligation to schedule around board meetings? The pasta arrived, and Ruby squealed with delight at the oversized portion. Oliver stared at his plate like he had never seen food before. Thomas moved automatically to cut Ruby's pasta into manageable pieces, his movements practiced and efficient. Oliver watched this ritual with fascination. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, Mr. Thomas, could you cut mine too? Veronica froze. Oliver had never asked anyone but his nanny to help with meals. He certainly had never asked Veronica, who usually worked through dinners on her tablet. But here he was, requesting this simple service from a complete stranger. Thomas did not hesitate or make it awkward. He simply pulled Oliver's plate closer and began cutting with the same care he showed Ruby. There you go, buddy. Perfect bite-sized pieces. My specialty. Oliver smiled again, brighter this time. Veronica felt tears prick her eyes and ruthlessly suppress them. She did not cry. She had not cried since building Sterling Technologies, had trained herself to view emotion as weakness. But watching this man in his faded shirt show her son more attentive care into minutes than she managed in weeks was breaking something fundamental inside her. From across the dining room, she heard familiar laughter, sharp, cruel laughter. She looked up to see Victoria Hammond, a board member's wife, holding court at a nearby table. The woman was staring at their corner gathering with undisguised contempt. Victoria's voice carried clearly, pitched to be overheard. "How fascinating. Veronica Sterling slumming with the help. I suppose even ice queens need to perform charity occasionally for the cameras. What a spectacle. Her reputation will never recover from associating with obvious poverty." Thomas's face went carefully blank. He was accustomed to this treatment, Veronica realized. He had learned to absorb casual cruelty as part of existing in spaces that did not welcome him. The resignation in his eyes made her furious in a way boardroom betrayals never did. But before Veronica could respond, Ruby stood up on her chair, all righteous 6-year-old fury. "My daddy is better than everyone here. He helps people when they're sad. He fixes buildings so they're safe. You're just mean." Oliver stood too, adding his voice with surprising strength. "Mr. Thomas is nicer than anyone at Mama's office. He knows how to smile. None of you know how to smile right." The dining room had gone silent. Everyone was watching this unlikely scene, two small children defending a construction worker against the city's elite, with Veronica Sterling sitting at the center of it all. Veronica stood slowly, her movements deliberate. She looked directly at Victoria Hammond, her expression arctic. "My son is correct. Mr. Reed possesses more genuine integrity, his worn work shirt, than this entire dining room combined. And these children demonstrate more courage and loyalty than most of my executive team. I chose this table deliberately because I recognize something authentic, something real that I have been missing. If that damages my reputation in your circles, Victoria, then perhaps I have been keeping the wrong company." Victoria's face flushed red. Several other diners looked away, uncomfortable. Veronica sat back down, her heart pounding. She had just publicly aligned herself with a working-class stranger and implicitly criticized her own social circle. The professional consequences would be significant, and she discovered she did not care. Thomas was staring at her with something like wonder. Ruby had sat back down and was eating pasta like nothing dramatic had happened. Oliver leaned against Veronica's arm, a small gesture of affection he rarely offered. "Thank you, Mama," he whispered. "That was brave." Veronica's hand found Oliver's and squeezed gently. "You were brave first, sweetheart. You taught me something important tonight." Before anyone could speak further, Veronica's phone buzzed violently. She glanced at the screen and felt ice flood her veins. 17 urgent messages from her executive assistant. A board member was calling repeatedly. Something catastrophic had happened. She opened the most recent message and read 3 words that shattered her evening. "Emergency meeting. Coup attempt." The phone slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers and clattered onto the table. Veronica's vision blurred at the edges as she stared at the phone screen. The words seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Coup attempt. Someone within her own company, someone she had trusted, was moving against her right now while she sat in a restaurant cutting pasta with strangers. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably. The trembling spread up her arms, into her shoulders. She tried to breathe and found her lungs refusing to cooperate properly. The dining room sounds became muffled, distant, as though she were hearing them through water. Thomas noticed immediately. His entire demeanor shifted from casual friendliness to sharp focus. He moved around the table into quick strides and knelt beside her chair, his construction-scarred hands surprisingly gentle as they gripped her wrists. "Veronica, look at me." His voice was calm, authoritative, cutting through the panic fog. "Count the lights above us. How many chandeliers can you see from this angle?" She tried to focus on his face. Those green eyes held steady, anchoring her. I don't single quotes double quotes, count them," Thomas repeated firmly. Out loud. "Give me numbers." 4, she managed. "For chandeliers. Good. Now tell me, what texture is the tablecloth under your hands?" Her fingers clutched the fabric. "Linen. Expensive linen. Excellent. Now breathe with me. In 4/4 counts. Hold 4/4. Out 4/4. Thomas demonstrated, exaggerating his breathing so she could follow the rhythm. Veronica matched his pattern. Once, twice, 3 times. The roaring in her ears began to recede. The trembling slowed. Her vision cleared enough to see Ruby and Oliver watching with worried faces, their pastor forgotten. "How did you know?" Veronica whispered as her breathing normalized. "How did you know what to do?" Thomas helped her sit up straighter, but stayed close. "I specialized in crisis intervention before I switched to architecture. Worked with emergency response teams for 5 years. I recognize acute stress reactions." Before Veronica could process this revelation, her executive assistant Rebecca burst into the restaurant, her usually perfect composure shattered. The young woman's mascara was smudged, her suit jacket askew. She spotted Veronica and rushed over, oblivious to their humble caller location. "Miss Sterling, thank God. We have a situation. Julian Blackwood has called an emergency board meeting. He claims to have evidence of financial impropriety and is demanding your immediate removal as CEO. He's gathering votes right now. The meeting is in 40 minutes. Julian Blackwood." Veronica's stomach clenched. Her former mentor, the man who had helped her secure her first major investor, had been circling her position for 2 years. She had always known he resented that she had exceeded his own achievements, but she had not anticipated he would move this aggressively. "What evidence?" Veronica's voice came out stronger than she felt. Rebecca glanced nervously at Thomas and the children. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately. These people have more integrity than half my board. Speak freely." Rebecca swallowed hard. "He claims you've been using company funds for personal expenses. He has receipts, invoices, transaction records. It's all fabricated, obviously, but it looks convincing. He's also obtained medical records suggesting you're experiencing severe stress and mental instability, claiming you're unfit to lead, and ... And what? There's video. From tonight. Someone filmed your panic attack. It's already being shared with board members, framed as evidence of your deteriorating mental state." Veronica felt the panic threatening to return. They had orchestrated this perfectly. The fabricated evidence, the medical claims, and now real footage of her having a breakdown in a public restaurant. Julian had been planning this 4 months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Thomas stood, his jaw set with determination. "May I see the evidence?" Rebecca blinked at him. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" "Someone who knows more about corporate manipulation than you might expect." "Let me see what they have." Veronica nodded, beyond caring about protocol. Rebecca reluctantly handed over her tablet. Thomas began scrolling through documents with surprising speed, his eyes moving with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to analyzing complex information. "These financial records are amateur forgeries," Thomas stated after 3 minutes. "The timestamps don't align with your company's standard accounting software cycles. The invoice numbers follow a sequential pattern that doesn't match legitimate vendor coding. And these medical records were clearly purchased from a corrupt clinic because they reference medications that weren't even on the market during the dates listed." Everyone stared at him. Thomas looked up, catching their expressions. "I told you I worked crisis intervention. I also did forensic analysis for insurance fraud cases. You learned to spot manufactured evidence." Ruby tugged her father's sleeve. "Daddy, are the bad people trying to hurt the nice lady?" "Yes, sweetheart, but we're going to help her." Oliver grabbed Veronica's hand. "Mama, Mr. Thomas is like a superhero. He can fix anything." Veronica looked at this man she had met less than an hour ago. A construction worker with a hidden past who had just expertly dismantled a corporate conspiracy in minutes. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Thomas met her gaze steadily. "Because your son needs his mother. Because that little boy over there who was too afraid to smile is finally laughing. Because I've spent 3 years watching good people get crushed by those with more power and money. And I'm tired of standing by silently. And maybe because I see something in you that reminds me why I used to believe people could change." The vulnerability in his voice struck something deep in Veronica's chest. This man had been broken by tragedy, had rebuilt himself into something smaller to protect his daughter, but underneath remained someone extraordinary, someone she desperately needed right now. "Will you come with me to this meeting?" Veronica asked. I have lawyers, strategists, but none of them see things the way you do. I need someone who isn't afraid of Julian Blackwood. I'll come, Thomas said simply. Then he turned to Ruby. Baby girl, you and Oliver are going to have an adventure. Miss Veronica's assistant is going to take you somewhere fun, while Daddy helps with grown-up stuff. Ruby frowned. But I want to help too. Oliver nodded vigorously in agreement. Thomas knelt to his daughter's level. You already helped. You reminded everyone here what matters. You showed them how to be brave. Now I need you to keep Oliver company and be your wonderful self. Can you do that for me? Ruby hugged her father fiercely. Okay, Daddy. But come back soon. Rebecca looked bewildered, but took charge of the children. There's a gaming lounge to floors up in this building. Very exclusive. I'll keep them entertained there. As Rebecca shepherded the children away, Ruby grabbed Oliver's hand protectively. The two kids walked off together, already chattering about what games they would play. Veronica watched them go, feeling a pang of loss. When had Oliver last looked that carefree? Thomas was already pulling on his worn jacket. We need to get to your office immediately. How long until the meeting? 35 minutes. Then we need to move. On the way, tell me everything you know about Julian Blackwood. His background, his relationships, his weaknesses. They rushed from the restaurant into Veronica's waiting car. The driver accelerated smoothly into evening traffic, while Veronica briefed Thomas on Julian's history. The man absorbed information, a tactical computer, occasionally asking sharp questions that revealed insights she had missed. Julian was your mentor 15 years ago, Thomas summarized. He helped you secure funding for Sterling Technologies when you were 23 and struggling. He expected gratitude and deference. Instead, you exceeded him. Your company became more successful, more influential. He felt displaced by his own protege. Yes, but I don't understand how that leads to this. I've given him positions, board seats, consultation fees worth millions. You gave him scraps from your table when he believed he should be sitting at the head. This isn't about money, Veronica. It's about ego and perceived emasculation. You're a woman who surpassed him. That's the wound that never healed. The psychological accuracy made Veronica uncomfortable. How do you know so much about corporate dynamics? Thomas was quiet for a moment. My wife died in a building collapse. A building I helped design. The construction company cut corners, used substandard materials, and falsified inspection reports to save money. When everything came down, 3 people died. My wife was one of them. Veronica felt her heart constrict. Thomas, I'm so sorry. I spent 2 years investigating that company. I learned how to trace financial fraud, how to identify falsified documents, how corrupt systems protect themselves. I couldn't save her, but I made sure that company went bankrupt and its executives went to prison. I became very good at seeing through lies. The pain in his voice was raw, unhealed. Veronica understood suddenly why he worked construction now, instead of practicing architecture. He had walked away from a career that had cost him everything precious. After the trial ended, I couldn't design buildings anymore, Thomas continued. Every blueprint felt like a potential death sentence. So I took work where I could use my hands, where mistakes were immediate and fixable. But I never forgot how to analyze evidence or spot corruption. They pulled up to Sterling Technologies headquarters, a gleaming tower of steel and glass that represented everything Veronica had built. Thomas looked up at it, his expression unreadable. Impressive fortress, he said quietly. Let's make sure it stays yours. They rode the elevator to the executive floor in tense silence. Veronica used the time to compose herself, pulling on the cold professional mask she wore like armor. But when Thomas touched her elbow gently, the mask cracked slightly. You don't need to be ice to be strong, he said softly. Your humanity is your greatest asset tonight, not your weakness. Julian is counting on you to fight this battle with pure corporate aggression. He knows that territory. Surprise him with something different. The elevator doors opened to chaos. Her executive team clustered in tight groups, whispering urgently. Lawyers spread documents across conference tables. Everyone looked up when Veronica emerged, their faces showing various mixtures of concern, calculation, and in a few cases, barely concealed satisfaction. Julian Blackwood stood at the far end of the hallway, surrounded by his supporters. He was 62, silver-haired, distinguished in an expensive charcoal suit. When he saw Veronica, his smile was predatory. "Veronica, so glad you could join us. I was concerned you might be too unstable for this discussion." His eyes flicked dismissively to Thomas. "And you've brought a guest. How irregular." "This is Thomas Reed, my new strategic advisor," Veronica stated clearly. "He'll be participating in tonight's meeting." Julian laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You've hired a strategic advisor in the last hour." "Really, Veronica? This desperation doesn't suit you, though I suppose it's consistent with your recent pattern of erratic behavior." Thomas stepped forward, his posture relaxed but commanding. "Mr. Blackwood, I've reviewed the evidence you plan to present tonight. Your financial fraud allegations rely on forged invoices with sequential numbering that doesn't match Sterling Technologies' vendor management system. The timestamps are inconsistent with the company's accounting software cycles. Any forensic accountant worth their certification will spot the fabrication in under 10 minutes. Julian's smile faltered slightly. "And you are qualified to make these assessments because I spent 5 years doing forensic analysis for insurance fraud investigations. I've seen manufactured evidence from professionals. Yours is competent amateur work at best." A murmur ran through the assembled executives. Several of Julian's supporters looked nervous. Julian's face darkened. "You're bluffing. You're some nobody she picked up to play dress-up as an expert." Thomas pulled out his phone, tapped several buttons, and projected an image onto the nearest wall screen. It showed a detailed breakdown of the forged invoices, with each irregularity highlighted and annotated. "I did this analysis in the car on the way here," Thomas explained calmly. "Would you like me to continue? Because I also have significant concerns about your medical evidence. Those records claim Veronica was prescribed medications during dates when those drugs weren't yet FDA approved." "That's an impressive feat of time travel." The room erupted. Board members began examining documents on their tablets. Lawyers huddled urgently. Julian's carefully constructed case was unraveling in real time. But Julian had not become powerful by being easily defeated. He switched tactics, his voice rising with righteous anger. "So she's bought herself an analyst. That doesn't address the fundamental issue. We all saw the video. Veronica Sterling had a complete breakdown in a public restaurant tonight. She collapsed in front of witnesses. How can we trust someone so unstable to lead a multi-billion-dollar company?" The assembled crowd went quiet. This was the real weapon, the one that could not be easily dismissed. Veronica felt her carefully constructed composure threatening to shatter again. The video existed. The breakdown had happened. Julian had turned her moment of vulnerability into ammunition. Thomas looked at Veronica, and in his eyes she saw something unexpected. Not pity, but profound respect. He nodded slightly, encouraging her. Veronica took a deep breath and stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. "You're right, Julian. I did have a stress-induced collapse tonight. Would you like to know why?" She pulled up her own phone, connected to the screen, and displayed her calendar for the past month. The assembled crowd saw what she lived: 18-hour days, back-to-back meetings, international calls at 3 in the morning, months without a single day off. "This is what leadership looks like in reality," Veronica stated. "Not the sanitized version we present to shareholders. This is a woman running a company through a global expansion while raising a child alone, while dealing with constant attempts to undermine her authority. I reached my breaking point tonight because I am human, not because I am weak." She switched to another image, Oliver's school calendar, showing all the events marked with nanny attending instead of mom attending. "And this is the cost. My son barely knows me. I have provided him every material advantage while failing him in every way that matters. Tonight, he asked a stranger to cut his pasta, because that stranger has been more present in 10 minutes than I have been in months." That realization, combined with learning that my former mentor was staging a coup, caused an acute stress response. It was not mental instability. It was the appropriate reaction of a person pushed beyond sustainable limits. The room was silent. Several people looked uncomfortable. Veronica pressed her advantage. Julian is betting that you will see my humanity as weakness. He spent months fabricating evidence and waiting for me to show vulnerability so he could weaponize it. He orchestrated this entire scenario because he cannot accept that his former protege exceeded him. This isn't about fitness to lead. It's about ego and revenge. Julian's face had gone red. This is absurd speculation. Thomas stepped forward again, his voice calm but carrying authority. Is it? Because I can trace the video's origin. It was filmed by a restaurant employee who was hired just 3 days ago. An employee whose previous job was with a private investigation firm that has financial ties to your personal investment fund. The timing is remarkable. He projected more evidence, showing the paper trail he had somehow assembled during their brief car ride. The crowd's attention shifted entirely to Julian, who was now visibly sweating. You've been planning this 4 months, Thomas continued, planting evidence, hiring operatives, waiting for Veronica to show any crack in her armor. You've spent enormous resources trying to destroy a woman whose only crime was being better at business than you. And tonight, she gave you the perfect opening. So you moved immediately. A board member, Harold Chen, stood up. He was old guard, respected, generally neutral in political battles. Julian, is this true? Julian stammered, his composure finally breaking. This is a witch hunt. You're taking the word of some random consultant over mine. I'm taking evidence over speculation, Harold replied coldly. And frankly, I'm troubled by your methods regardless of your motivations. This kind of manipulation has no place in Sterling Technologies' leadership. Other board members nodded agreement. Julian looked around at the eroding support, panic finally showing in his eyes. He had gambled everything on this moment and lost spectacularly. The vote, Julian said desperately. We still need to vote on Veronica's fitness to lead. Harold stood. I move that we table this meeting entirely and launch a full investigation into the allegations against both Veronica and Julian. All in favor. The vote was unanimous. Julian's face went from red to pale white. He had not just failed to remove Veronica, he had exposed himself to scrutiny that would likely end his own career. As the room emptied, Julian approached Veronica one last time. His voice was low, bitter. You always were smarter than me. I should have accepted that years ago. You should have remembered that I learned everything from you. Veronica replied quietly, including how to recognize when someone is trying to destroy me. Julian left without another word. Thomas stayed close to Veronica after the last executives filed out, leaving them alone in the conference room. You did well, Thomas said softly. You turned vulnerability into strength. That takes more courage than most people ever find. Veronica felt tears finally escape, running down her cheeks unchecked. I almost lost everything tonight. My company, my reputation, my son's respect. But you didn't. You saved it by being honest about your humanity. Thomas handed her a tissue from the conference table. Though I suspect that honesty came with a cost. What do you mean? You told everyone in that room that you've been failing as a mother. That's going to hurt for a while. Veronica nodded, more tears coming. Oliver deserves better than what I've given him. You showed me that tonight. He needs a parent who is present, not just providing. Then start being present, Thomas said simply. Not tomorrow or next week, right now. Those kids are waiting for us upstairs. Let's go show them that the scary meeting ended okay. They rode the elevator up to the gaming lounge. The doors opened to reveal Ruby and Oliver playing a racing game together, shrieking with laughter. Rebecca sat nearby, looking exhausted but smiling at their antics. Oliver saw Veronica and ran over, throwing his arms around her waist. Mama, did Mr. Thomas fix the bad people? Veronica knelt and hugged her son properly. Maybe for the first time in months. We fixed them together, sweetheart. And Mama learned something important tonight about what really matters. Ruby joined them, grabbing Thomas's hand. Can Oliver come home with us, Daddy? We want to build a blanket fort. Thomas looked at Veronica, a question in his eyes. Veronica found herself nodding before her logical brain could interfere. Actually, why don't you all come to my home? It's closer, and I think we could all use some blanket fort time. The ride to Veronica's penthouse was filled with the children's excited chatter. Thomas sat quietly, looking out at the city lights. Veronica studied his profile. This unexpected man who had walked into her life at exactly the moment she needed saving. "Thank you," she said softly, so only he could hear. "For everything tonight." Thomas turned to her, and his smile was gentle. "Thank you for letting me help. I forgot what it felt like to use my skills for something important, to matter beyond just fixing leaky pipes. You matter," Veronica said firmly. "You matter very much." The look that passed between them held promise and possibility. To broken people who had found unexpected connection in the worst moment. Veronica did not know where this was going, but for the first time in years, she wanted to find out. Veronica's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building that overlooked the city's glittering skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the urban landscape like a painting. Modern furniture in whites and greys created spaces that felt more like a showroom than a home. Everything was expensive, curated, and utterly impersonal. Ruby walked in and immediately wrinkled her nose. "It's pretty, but it doesn't feel like anyone lives here. Where are the pictures? Where are the toys?" Oliver looked embarrassed. "My toys are in the playroom. I'm not supposed to leave them out." "Mrs. Henderson says mess is inappropriate." "Who's Mrs. Henderson?" Ruby asked. "My nanny. She takes care of me when Mama is working." Thomas caught Veronica's eye, and she saw the gentle judgment there. Her home reflected her life, beautiful, functional, and emotionally empty. The contrast with the warmth she had witnessed in that restaurant corner, the easy affection between Thomas and Ruby, made her penthouse feel like a mausoleum. "Well, tonight we're making appropriate mess," Veronica declared, surprising herself. "Oliver, show Ruby your playroom. Pick out whatever you want to play with, and we'll bring it all out here." Oliver's eyes went wide. "Really? But Mrs. Henderson says the living room is for guests only. I'm changing the rules. This is your home, not a museum. Act like it." The children ran off squealing. Thomas walked to the windows, looking out at the view. "Quite a perspective from up here. You can see the whole city. Sometimes I stand here late at night and wonder if I actually know any of those people down there," Veronica admitted. "I've spent so many years climbing that I forgot to notice the world I left behind. It's not too late to reconnect. You proved that tonight." Veronica joined him at the window. "I wouldn't have done it without you. I would have walked into that meeting alone and fought Julian's coup with pure aggression. I would have won or lost on cold logic. Instead, you taught me to fight with honesty. You taught yourself that," Thomas corrected. "I just reminded you it was an option." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights blur into abstract patterns. Veronica found herself acutely aware of Thomas's presence beside her. He smelled like sawdust and clean cotton, so different from the expensive colognes worn by men in her usual circles. The simplicity of it was oddly attractive. "Tell me more about your wife," Veronica said softly. "If you're comfortable talking about it." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Her name was Catherine. We met in college. She was studying engineering. I was in architecture. We bonded over shared building projects and bad coffee. She was brilliant, funny, completely unimpressed by pretension. We got married at 25, had Ruby 2 years later. Everything was perfect." His voice roughened with old pain. "Then the firm I worked for took on a major commercial development. I was junior architect, but I caught problems in the structural plans. Insufficient support columns, substandard materials specified. I reported it to the senior partners. They dismissed my concerns, said I was being paranoid, and that budget constraints required compromises." Veronica's heart clenched, knowing what came next. "I should have pushed harder. Should have gone over their heads, reported to city inspectors, done something more. But I was 28 and afraid of losing my job, so I documented my objections in writing and moved on to other projects." 3 months later, Catherine was at a meeting in that building. 7th floor. During a windstorm, the inadequate support structure failed. Partial collapse. 3 dead, 12 injured. Oh, Thomas, Veronica breathed. I had the documentation proving I warned them, so I wasn't legally liable. But Catherine was gone, and I had to live knowing I could have prevented it if I'd been braver. I threw everything into investigating the firm, spent 2 years building a case that sent 4 executives to prison and bankrupted the company. Won a massive settlement, but none of it brought her back. Is that why you left architecture? Thomas nodded. I couldn't look at blueprints without seeing that building falling. Couldn't design anything without obsessing over every structural element, seeing potential disasters everywhere. I had a nervous breakdown, spent time in therapy, eventually realized I needed to do work where the consequences were immediate and visible, where I could fix problems with my hands instead of hoping my designs held. But you're still brilliant at analysis, Veronica pointed out. You dismantled Julian's conspiracy in minutes. Analyzing evidence for fraud is different. It's retrospective, not prospective. I'm not predicting what might fail. I'm examining what already happened, that I can handle. Loud laughter erupted from Oliver's playroom. The children emerged dragging blankets, cushions, and an elaborate collection of toys. Ruby was balancing a stuffed elephant on her head, while Oliver carried an armful of building blocks. We're making the best fort ever, Ruby announced. Daddy, you have to help with the engineering part. Thomas's expression transformed, the grief replaced by genuine joy. Engineering part. This sounds serious. What's the design plan? Ruby and Oliver spread out their materials with chaotic enthusiasm. Thomas knelt down with them, and Veronica watched as he guided the children through creating a blanket fort structure. He asked questions about weight distribution, made suggestions about support angles, praised their creative problem solving. It was architecture on a tiny, safe scale. Veronica found herself pulled into the project. She held blanket corners while Thomas secured them to furniture. She crawled inside the fort to test structural integrity, while the children giggled. At some point, she looked down and realized she was sitting cross-legged on her expensive carpet, covered in dust and grinning like an idiot. Part 2 is coming soon. If you want part 2, please subscribe and drop a comment for part 2.